Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Bedford Creative's peer-to-peer session. So exciting. This is the first one. So this series is geared to enrich, educate, and connect creatives within our community. My name is Marianella Perry, the Senior ARPA Fellow at New Bedford Creative. Thank you for joining us. So before we begin, I would just like to let everybody know that New Bedford Creative has 2 grant programs, and I encourage you to apply. ArtNet is a new training program and recovery grant for New Bedford-based artists and culture makers. There is a rolling deadline until we reach about 100 individuals. So definitely, we encourage you to apply as soon as possible. This program will launch in 2023. The second grant program is called Art is Everywhere, and it's for projects in New Bedford that address a current challenge facing residents using a creative arts or culture-based solution. Both programs are being funded by the City of New Bedford's ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website, newbedfordcreative.org, and click Grant Programs. So just a brief overview. New Bedford is the home of artists, creatives, change makers, designers, entrepreneurs, and community enthusiasts. Our peer-to-peer sessions embraces the pulse that makes New Bedford so unique, while also expanding our knowledge and connections. We're super special. I'd like to take this time to thank MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation for funding this program. Peer-to-peer sessions is one component of a broader TDI Creative Cities initiative to boost arts-based economic development. So before I introduce John, I want to go over the format of this session. Once I'm done, I'll pass it over to John, and he'll present for about 15 to 20 minutes. During that time, please feel free to add your questions to the chat. It would be more beneficial for you to ask questions that are tailored to specific projects you're working on. I think this is going to help you make the best use of this time. And now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, artist John Magnan, who will present topics he has called Your Art is Your Business. For today's session, John will cover topics ranging from why and how to set up a sole proprietorship, filing taxes, the importance of record keeping, and the real relationship between time and money. Next week, on November 8th, he will share his observations and experiences regarding income streams, contracts, and commissions, artistic copyright, and moral rights. John, thank you so much for being our first presenter of peer-to-peer sessions this year. I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Marianella, and welcome to the first of 2 sessions talking about how to treat your art as a business. This is not a tutorial. It's an introduction to the factors that you might want to think about if you're considering establishing yourself as a sole proprietor, or it might help you decide that you don't want to do that. This is me, and I recommend that as we go through this, that you take screenshots of certain things. You might, if you want to get in touch with me later, that's my email address or my website address. I'd be happy to answer questions that you might think of after this session is over that I can't answer here today. I am a sculptor working primarily in wood, and I create permanent installations and solo exhibitions addressing social issues. The topics I'm going to be covering today are what I think of as the accounting business side of art. Like, what is a sole proprietor? How do you get into it? Taxes and so on. The next time is more of the operational side, the income streams and commissions, and the copyright, moral rights, fair use topics, which are critically important as we put our art out there. So let me begin by pointing out that if your intent already is to make money on your art, then you're already a business. Whether you're registered as a sole proprietor or not, you are in business. You are expected to pay taxes on your income that you make from that art, and you're expected to collect sales tax when you sell your art. So you're already a business, but you still might not want to register as a sole proprietor. But why would you do that? Well, one is, of course, you can deduct your business expenses from your profit and reduce your income tax liability. But it also makes it easier to keep track of and pay sales tax that you would be collecting on your sales. And it also makes you look more like a professional. You know, if you have a business and a business name and a website, and put your image out there, business cards and what have you, that it will make you look more professional and be more respected as a serious artist who's not just dabbling, but trying to run a business. Before you launch yourself, I recommend that you think about some important foundation questions. Now, I know I'm not going to get into these in any depth because I know that Catherine Carter is going to talk about a number of these in a future session, but you need to think about, before you launch yourself, who are you? What are you trying to do? What clients are you really after? What are your goals? Do you have an artist statement? Do you have a portfolio? And do you have an elevator speech? Literally, if you're on that elevator or standing at a cocktail party and somebody says, "What do you do?" Do you have the one-liner? You heard me give mine a couple of minutes ago. I'm a wood sculptor that creates permanent installations and exhibitions addressing social issues. That's enough to start the conversation. If somebody is interested in saying, "What social issues?" I can answer. Economic inequality, environmental issues, health and medicine, and whatever else I want to add. And the conversation can continue from there. But it's really important to have that one-liner so that you can get the message out before they turn and walk away from you because you took too long to tell them what you're doing. So you've decided then who you are, what you're trying to do, and you're ready to be a sole proprietor. What is that? It's a business that's run by one person, where the owner and the business are indistinguishable in the eyes of the law. You are the business. And as such, you're entitled to any profits that you make, and you're responsible for paying all the bills for that business. You're all one and the same. There are other business models. I'm not going to go into the other ones, except to remind you that doing business as yourself is a business model without registering as a sole proprietor. You're still responsible for income tax. You're still responsible for sales tax, but you don't have to have a registered business name with a tax ID. The other models are a limited liability or an incorporation. I'm not going to go into those, but the website that I give here, the grasshopper.com website, is a good one that I found that will give you a great rundown of what is the difference between all these different models. And it's actually in plain English. It's a pretty nice site. So the steps that are involved in creating a sole proprietorship in the state of Massachusetts anyway, is you visit a site called Mass Tax Connect. I'll give you links to these on the next slide. But the steps are, you go to Mass Tax Connect, you register your chosen business name. That is, you search for a name that nobody else has that you want. And that by return email, you will get a sales and use tax certificate called an ST1. And voila, you're a business, just like that. You'll get a hard copy of that certificate in the mail a week or two later. And then in the state of Massachusetts, you are now a registered sole proprietor. The feds won't know you exist as a sole proprietor until you declare yourself on your next federal income tax return. At that point, you fill out a Schedule C on your 1040. You say that, hey, I'm a business, and you fill out all those things. And then from there on in, the Fed recognizes you as a business. So the steps that you would go through to sign up is you go to Mass Tax Connect site, and then the middle link that I show that has the yellow print is the page that you go to that actually takes you step by step through the registering your business and entering your information. And it goes right through the various pages. And what I discovered preparing for this talk is once you registered, they don't let you go back through it again. I wanted to go through it to show you the pages right here on this site, and it wouldn't let me because it knows who I am. And so I couldn't do that for you. But it's pretty simple. Once you get in there into the register your business with MassTax Connect page, it'll take you right on through. With one thing it doesn't make clear, it asks for an employee identification number. And if you're like me, you won't have one and you don't need one. You can use your social security number where it asks for an EIN, but they don't tell you that until the page after you need it. So keep that in mind. So now that you're a business, you have to think about taxes. They're always going to be there. And you're going to have to deal with sales tax in two different ways and with income tax. And depending upon the complexity of your business and your own financial situation and other income you may have or not, I recommend it at the minimum you get some, use some tax preparation software and look for an accountant if you don't already have one. You don't need a complicated accounting firm to handle your business. A local accountant that's affordable to you will know what has to be done to handle your business expenses. You might not even need an accountant, but you definitely will need tax preparation software. And the reason, as I'll talk about a little bit more later, is software allows you to try things out and see whether it's worth doing certain things as your business progresses. You will encounter sales tax, first of all, when you buy something. You go into Michael's and you buy some canvases, or wherever you go, you pay taxes on it. All those taxes that you pay on anything you buy, it's actually deductible from your business expenses. I say income tax there, but it should be, it's deductible from your business expenses. You don't always have to pay sales tax. They can be avoided with a couple of Massachusetts forms called ST12 and ST4. In most cases, you don't need to do that. It's worth it to just pay the tax and accumulate it and deduct it from your expenses later. But what an ST12 does is allows you to exempt yourself from paying sales tax when you have a really large purchase. If you don't have large purchases, it's probably not worth it. In my case, if I have a large commission and I go to a local hardwood supplier and I buy $8,000 worth of hardwood, it's worth it for me to get an exempt use certificate and not pay that sales tax. But if I'm just going over to my local hardware store and buying a widget for $4.12, it's not worth it. You can't do it. The resale certificate is for those of you that might be selling like through a gallery, as an example, where you are buying work from one person with the intent to sell it out of your gallery or to resell it yourself. When you buy the work with the intent to resell it, you don't have to pay sales tax on it. You just have to record an ST4. So again, you can look those up and get the full description from MassTax Connect, which will tell you how both the ST12 and the ST4 work. On the other side, when you sell something yourself from your business, you are required to collect sales tax unless the buyer is a nonprofit organization or they themselves have a tax exempt form, which relaxes you from the requirement to collect the taxes, or if the buyer is out of state. If you ship work out of state or if you deliver it out of state, you don't collect Maryland state tax, Massachusetts state tax. It's up to the buyer to pay their local state tax. But regardless of whether you collect the sales tax or not, or even if you have no sales, once you register in Massachusetts as a sole proprietor, you are required to file a sales tax form every 90 days, even if you sell nothing. But as burdensome as that might sound, it's really trivial. It's a very easy form. You just click in, tell them how much income you had. It tells you how much taxes you're supposed to have collected. And of course, you will have collected it. So then you can pay the tax to the state right online with the usual bank transfer. If you're selling through a third party, you don't have to collect a tax because they do. And the best example for most of us or a third party is a gallery. If we put work in a gallery and the gallery sells it, they will collect the sales tax, and then they will pay us whatever we have coming to us for that sale, after they take their own commission off of it. But there's no requirement for us to think about sales tax for those. It just goes on our income tax. Now, here's the most important slide in the whole presentation. On income taxes, if you are selling your artwork, you have to claim all of that art income regardless of the source. Everything that I sell, everything that you sell is income. It's subject to income tax. Any other source, such as New Bedford Creative pays all of the speakers for this series, a small stipend for doing it, that's art income for me. I have to claim that and pay income taxes on it. And that is done on a form Schedule C, where you show all of your business income and all of your expenses, which you will be keeping track of throughout the year, of course. If you haven't filed as a Schedule C before, prepare yourself for the surprise that you'll have to pay 15.3% of your business profit as self-employment tax. And that's because when you've had a regular job, when you got your pay stub, if you were in that kind of a job, you paid 7.5% into Social Security out of your pay, and your employer paid about the same amount also to match that went into Social Security. But as a sole proprietor, you are both the employer and the employee. So you have to pay all of that, which adds up to 15.3%, which is your self-employment tax. And you've probably heard people complain about that in the news, and now you know why. But the benefit is it gives you Social Security and disability credits towards your retirement. And again, depending upon your situation, where you are in your own life, that may be beneficial to you, or it might not, in which case you have to decide whether it's worth being a business and paying that 15%, whether it helps you or doesn't help you. And that's where the software can help you put in numbers and play with that and see if it works for you. So after you're done deducting all of your expenses and your 15% self-employment tax, your profit goes on to your personal income tax, and then you get to pay income tax on that, which is a lot of fun too. And there is a little bit of a break there because half of the self-employment tax roughly is deductible from your personal income tax. So again, it depends on how much you've actually made, whether you break even or fall behind when you do that. And then after that, it's a standard federal tax form. And when you finish with your federal return, software or an accountant will just transfer all that number over to from the federal forms to the state forms, and you're done. And I can't say it enough, do the math. It might not be worth it for you to claim to be a sole proprietor. Look at your pattern of projected sales and what are your expenses. As a sculptor, I tend to have large expenses and larger costs for individual pieces that are like one at a time, but a painter or a 2D artist or a photographer might have smaller price points but have a lot more pieces, different kinds of expenses. So it's worth everybody looking at their own case in some detail. And along the way, to help yourself, keep really good records. You have to keep track of everything you've done with money for sure. And it's a good idea to keep track of the flow of time and where your time goes, at least for a while. If your business is new and you're trying to figure out how much you're really making per hour in the studio, keeping good records of where your time goes, how much is in the studio and how much is spent doing other things will be helpful. But even if you don't keep track of time, you must keep track of the money, because that's what shows you how much you really made. And you got to have all those numbers for your tax returns anyway. And as you analyze that, it'll help you keep track of it'll help you manage your time and your effort. And it's a job. Record keeping is a job. Set up a system. I use Quicken for all the financial stuff. I set up my own little Microsoft Word table to keep track of time. I keep logs on big projects, day-to-day logs of how many hours a day I've spent on. If it's a really big project, I've had one project that lasted 2 years, and I had another one recently that lasted 12 months. Keeping track of how much time you're spending on that will tell you how much you really made per hour over that long period of time. If you can create work in just a couple of days, it may not be that helpful. But still record every expense and don't fall behind. Keeping track of where you spent all of your money is really a job. When I come back from my local hardware store or I buy anything anywhere, I record it that day, because I don't want to 3 weeks from now try to remember, why did I buy that over there at Mahoney's Hardware? What was that for? What project was that for? And try to keep it all straight. Do it every single day, and then periodically look at the data and see where your time and money is going. Because you'd be amazed. I just sat down and jotted off this list of where my time goes. And making art is one. But look at all the other stuff that will suck time away from your studio, and it all counts and it's all important. When you're running out to buy supplies, when you're giving a presentation like this, when you're listening to a presentation like this, when you're making phone calls, that all counts. Writing an email, the clock keeps running, and every minute you spend doing one of these things when you're not making art is reducing the amount of money you're making on each piece of your art. And it's good to have a handle of that so you can make smart choices on where you want to put your art. That will help you say no to some things that would pull you away from the studio. And if you're not in the studio, you're not making more money for your business. And the money can also slip away. It's more obvious. It's not as sneaky as losing time, but because you can actually hold a receipt in your hand. But nonetheless, there's a long list of things where money can go that is coming out of your profits. So keep track of that. And on both those cases, time off and it impacts your profits. You don't get paid vacations if you're a sole proprietor. So if you take 2 weeks off in the summertime, that's 2 weeks out of studio. So when you divide how many hours you spent by how much you made, you have to use those 2 weeks in the denominator when you're figuring it out. So there's a lot of things where money goes. So that was my last slide for today's session. The next time we meet, I'll go more into the operational side. I'll talk about income streams and contracts a little bit. But again, I know that Den Santero is going to talk about contracts with galleries. I will not do that. I will focus on commissions because that's really what I have the most experience in. But I will talk about income streams and about the reality of how hard it is to make money as an artist. And I've had a lot of direct exposure with large commissions with copyrights and moral rights and fair use that I'll talk about. And then I have some thoughts that might surprise you about donations, and we've all been confronted with that challenge. So that completes my comments for today, and I'm ready to entertain comments or questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, John. That was wonderful. I appreciate it. A lot of information. So at this time, we're going to open it up for questions. And we'll first start with the questions that are in the chat. I did see a couple of them. And then if there's any more questions to add, we will address them after those. So the first question is from Kat. Where do we find the form that was used? Oh, which form?
I believe this was the one for the sales tax, the quarterly report to the state regarding sales tax.
Yes. Is there a certain form that we can find on the state website that we fill out to send in that information? Or is that, what's that form called? Just sales tax form?
You go to Mass Tax Connect. Once you've registered for sole proprietorship, it will tell you where you have to go to record it every 90 days. But I owe that to you, and I'm sorry I didn't pull it up. I'll try to pull it up on the side here while we're talking on another computer.
Yeah, just having the name, and then I'll be able to find it if I know the name of it. I'm already set up as an LLC for my studio because I do large scale projects, mostly murals
yeah.
and animation
Yeah.
and video production. But there's still bits of details on the budget management, money management side that I have to like take care of, tie up on the loose ends. I mentioned in the comments a woman who's really wonderful. Her name's Jenny Clark. She's an accountant who's fantastic that helps with small businesses. And she's helping me kind of get all my ducks in a row when it comes to this stuff. But when it comes to filing quarterly for the income that comes in, that one flew over me. I probably have to catch up in that area a little bit. So just knowing the rough name of it, it helps that I already know that I need to look for that. And so I can also try to go back and look for that form on the state website. But if there is a specific title for that form, that would help tremendously. Thank you.
Okay.
It's a sales and use tax, but I'm trying to get it on another screen while we're talking. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and then while John looks for that, the next question is, how often do you suggest keeping track of your records? So weekly, monthly, quarterly, every day? Okay.
Every time something happens in your business, my advice is every time you spend money, you record it that day. Now, obviously, you're not going to do it every single day. You'll miss days, but you can't miss more than a couple of days, and I start to lose track of what I've done. So I don't want a whole pile of receipts sitting on my desk or in a box someplace. I want to get them into my software and to Quicken to keep track of all my expenses. If I'm doing a log on a big project, I have to record it every single day without exception before I go to bed, because the next day things start again all over again, and you start to say,
Yeah.
oh geez, did I meet with that person today, or was that yesterday? And the more complex your business, the more important it is to stay right on top of that.
Thank you. I think you mentioned this already, but just to make sure, what system do you use to keep track of time? Was that Quicken, what you were talking about?
I use Quicken to keep track of money, of
Okay.
expenditures and income. And I make up my own form for keeping track of time. I just use a table in Microsoft Word. It's nothing
Okay.
sophisticated. And I use one column for date, one column for what did I do today, and one column for how many hours did I spend on my business that day. And then when the project's all done, like I did a year-long project I was referring to, I just tally up the number of hours I spent and how much I made, and then I know how much money I made per hour. And you can set up in Microsoft Word, you can set up an equation, a formula, so it will add up your hours spent as you go. It'll add up all the numbers in a column. So you can have a column, you could be involved in a project for 100 days and it'll just add up all the numbers for you. You don't have to go calculate them all.
Thank you.
Okay, it's a form ST9 for the person who was asking. It's sales and use tax, Mass Tax Connect form ST-9.
Thank you.
Can you post the time as money slide quickly?
Sure.
I believe that was it for questions in the chat. Margot, let me know if I missed anything.
Den Centauro posted about the freelance calculator. Den, I don't know if you're available to come off mute and just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm certainly available. Yeah, it's a calculator that I created for our pay equity and justice. And we'll be talking about it again in one of the workshops I'm going to be doing here for peer-to-peer in January. But it's free, it's available. I posted the link to the resources that it's in on Practice Best Practices site. Basically, what it allows you to do is to punch in an hourly rate and see what it translates to as a if you were an employee and all the benefits were covered. It shows you some of the benefits you have to take care of for yourself, like your Social Security, like John was talking about. And you can use it kind of in reverse for budgeting, because it also shows you what it annualizes to. So you can look at it from the other direction. You can say, well, what I want to earn is so much per year, and put in some numbers and see how close you get to that, and adjust the number up and down so you can see what your hourly rate needs to be. It's good for budgeting purposes, so you can actually have some planning for your own purposes, see how much time you have to actually work to make enough money, see what things you need to plan for to spend, like John was talking about. You have to pay that Social Security tax, you have to pay a lot of other things as well, your sales tax if you're actually selling. If you're selling objects, selling product, you're selling your time, you don't have to, that's a different story. There's no sales tax involved in selling your time. So the link is in the chat if you want to click over to see those, and you can download them for free. I also just posted an article that I read recently about some time tracking software. Somebody had asked me about that. So those of you who are looking for time tracking might want to follow up on that. I don't use any of them, so I can't recommend one. I built one myself a long time ago.
Thank you. I did see another question pop up. When did you transition to art?
Well, I had a previous career. I'm a lifelong woodworker, and it was a serious hobbyist all through my previous. I had a 28-year technical career, but I was always a serious woodworking hobbyist. And as time went on, especially through my 40s, my happy homeowner hobby woodworking started to change. I started to become more interested in art. And at the time, the place I was working for was starting to offer early out opportunities. So at the age of 49, I took an early out and I went back to school, and I studied sculpture for 4.5 years full time at Maryland Institute, College of Art in Baltimore, and then moved up here to go to UMass Dartmouth for 3 more years to get my MFA. And I've been working as an artist ever since. So I transitioned at around the age 50, 49 or 50.
At what point did you begin to turn a profit?
I don't always turn a profit. Most times, see, that's why you have to look at everybody's individual circumstance. I retired from another career. I have a pension, and a lot of people have a pension. And in the next session, I'm going to talk about income streams and a little bit about that. But I'm extremely lucky. I have the freedom to make a profit or not make a profit. So when I've gotten a lot of big commissions, and for those years, I've made a profit. But other years, like I've spent 15 months on 2 separate occasions. I spent 3 separate occasions. I've spent over a year creating a solo exhibition. During that year, I didn't sell a thing. I had my head down making an exhibition because I had the financial freedom to do that. If I had to live on my art, I would have to have a very different profile. That's why asking those questions that I put up front about the foundation that I called the foundation, I can go back to that. Who are you and what's your definition? That's going to depend on your circumstance. If you are in a circumstance where you must make a profit in order to live, you have a very different artistic profile than I have. When I've gotten large commissions, like a 1-year project with UMass Law School or a 2-year project with Eli Lilly, I made enough money, I could live on that if I had to, but other years I didn't. So when did I turn a profit? It goes up and down.
It makes sense. It makes sense. It's not something that's stable, which is why you have that as a
Well,
slide to share with us.
no, there are people who, I've known a few artists who live on their art. And I was going to talk about that next session, but I'll jump to it now. Arthur Moniz had a gallery in downtown New Bedford for many years. He and his family lived on his artwork. Bob Duff had a gallery in downtown New Bedford for many years. He lived on his artwork. But they had to stay in their lane. You know, Bob Duff does a certain kind of art, as did Arthur Moniz, and he developed a clientele based upon a certain kind of art, and people came to follow him for that. If he left that lane, if he started creating, if Bob Duff were to suddenly start creating abstract expressionism, he'd lose his following and he wouldn't sell. So that's why what kind of clients interest you, what are your business goals, what are your artistic goals, all interact into helping you decide whether it's important to make a profit, how much profit you need to make, and that's it. It's a unique personal decision that we all have to make.
Right. Okay. Another question. How did you develop your client list?
Mostly word of mouth.
Referrals.
I have a solo exhibit that's on it's like, it's word of mouth or just being out there and having people see it. Let me give you the secret to success. It's called luck. There are so many brilliant artists out there that never get the chance to be seen and never get the opportunities that I've had. I got lucky. 20 years ago, Anthony Mason from what used to be CBS News Sunday Morning walked into my studio and he wound up putting me on national television. Okay, that's luck. I have an exhibit on a permanent exhibit at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia. A senior executive from Eli Lilly, who lives in Philadelphia, walked in and saw that exhibit right at a time he was looking for an artist to work with Eli Lilly on a project to raise awareness of clinical trials, and he called me. That's luck. In other cases, it's just a matter of putting the art out there over and over and over, because you have to make your own luck. Just keep putting it out there, but there are no guarantees. Years go by where I make nothing, and then all of a sudden I get a phone call and I make a lot. That's
You're
a
a
very
lucky guy.
different profile. That's a very different profile from somebody running a gallery where they have to move paintings out of their gallery on a regular basis to make a profit. That's a different business model than mine.
Okay, thank you. Then I have another question here. Which came first, your vision for your work or what you saw as a need?
If it's financial need, I'm willing to live on my modest little pension here in a small little house and not spend a lot of money on myself. But if the phone rings and someone's ready to offer me a lot of money for a big commission, I'm happy to take it and work with them to develop that. Otherwise, I make the work I feel like making when I feel like making it.
Paula, does that answer your question?
Yeah, the question was really, after art school, did you see an opening for the type of work that you were creating? Or did, in terms of what was missing in the art marketplace? Or did you have people after your exhibition come to you and ask for specific kinds of work?
I made what I wanted to make, what was important to me. As I said earlier, I address social issues. And when I finished art school, I was focusing on health and medicine issues for a while. And I created an exhibit about ovarian cancer that got picked up by Mass General Hospital, and they helped to, and the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition. And we traveled that exhibit around the country. And that's what got me a lot of publicity for some of the work that I got. But I was making that because I had a passion for the subject matter, not because I thought it would make me any money at all. I just was doing it because I had to make that exhibit. And I've done a solo exhibit on economic inequality because I'm very passionate about where we stand on that in this country. And I put that artwork out there because I'm furious about that. That's my passion. And does it sell? Not really. Does it get me attention? Sometimes. Does it get me another commission? Sometimes. But I'm going to make, because I'm in a financial situation where I can survive on my little pension, I make what I want to make because that's where my heart is. As I said before, if I had to live on this, I wouldn't have that freedom.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful.
Oh, good.
So I have one other question. Am I hogging your time, John? Am I, Margot?
My time, I'm here for as long as you want to talk to me.
Okay, so so then another question is sort of relates to something similar. Do you consider it a necessity to do the solo exhibits or exhibits personally to get your work out at least once or twice, once a year or once every couple of years?
You want my answer or my wife's answer?
I want your answer since you're in the hot seat right now.
Okay, here's what I'm doing this year. I finished a 1 year. It's not the necessity is whatever my passion is for making things and where I am. I spent all of 2021 full-time with no days off working on a UMass Law School installation, which, by the way, you can all go see at the UMass Law School. That's a permanent installation that'll be there for probably 20 years. And it was a privilege to be able to do that. And I was well paid for it. And by the time the end of the year came, I was exhausted. So in 2022, I am making what I feel like making, and I'm putting it in the galleries out on the Cape. And I'm making small work one at a time because I needed the break. I didn't need another gigantic installation project. It would have exhausted me. And after I've done that for a year, will I be ready to go back to something big? Probably. Will I get the phone call to do it? Probably not. But if somebody called, I'd be ready. So it goes up and down. I can tell you that a full installation that takes 1 or 2 years will drain you to the bone. And you're a full-time contractor when that happens. So when you get a year where you can just make little work that you want and put it in a gallery just for fun, as artists, that's really cool.
And what would your wife's answer have been?
She's actually on my side. I was kind of joking, but she doesn't want the personal collection of the artist to get too big, if you know what I mean. You have to have all of this work in the house. Can't you sell some of it? And I do sell some, but
Of course.
I have a lot that is in the private collection of the artist, as we like to say.
That is for inspiration. Thank you. This is so helpful.
Well, I'm glad. I'm good.
How do you recommend responding to potential clients who request a project from you, but do not supply a budget that is sustainable? Nonprofits sometimes request artists to donate or create projects that do not cover the overhead cost Is there a way to negotiate so that all parties are able to remain sustainable? Do you have any recommendations for approaches that could be more on the negotiable side so that all parties are able to actually cover their costs? Because sometimes the nonprofits may not have it in their budget to pay the overhead. I know grants sometimes request that artists, find other means of supporting the project. Like I've had clients that would ask me to do a project that's like a $10,000 project, but they may provide a budget that's like $2,000 to cover what would be probably like close to an $8,000 or $10,000 project. And so what I would do is say, if there was a way to have access to the branding, like let's say if the client was going to benefit from the product I gave them, if I was able to collect like a certain percentage of any profit that was made from that over the course of time, that would eventually cover all the overhead. That was one way, but I wondered if you had any experiences or strategies to deal with that dynamic.
Do you need to make that money to live?
If a project needs to, let's say if there's like in the mural project role, for example, there's been times where I've been requested to paint a mural, but the budget was like $500. It's not sustainable. It won't even cover the painting cost. Now I don't take those projects on anymore because the parties asking don't necessarily understand what the true costs are. I just say no to them. But artists who are up and coming, so a part of my business practice is trying to help other young artists integrate into the professional setting. So I try to show them, these types of dynamics that occur within projects. And the only thing I tell artists now is if the budget doesn't cover the cost, don't take it on. Or if the project is going to make the client any money, like if it's going to be ad revenue money, if it's going to be revenue that's going to help advertise the idea that they're wanting the project to cover, like have them incorporate some of that revenue as like I don't know the right word for it. Like if somebody does a mural and the mural becomes advertisement for something, and then there's revenue that comes in after that mural is completed, maybe the artist could be paid parts of that. But I don't really have a proper set of like hard strategies to share with other young artists, when these types of situations arise. Like for example, there was in the Kilburn Mills, they were interested in having a very large wall, 2 walls painted, but I think they provided $1,000 budget for that idea. And it was like, that's preposterous. That's not possible. But there could have been a negotiation. Like, let's say if that means that the Kilburn was going to increase their revenue because they were going to beautify the space more, then maybe future a contract could be created that royalties. Yes, Jen just mentioned it, royalties, something. But I'm just wondering, like, do you have any experience or input, with these types of dynamics where the nonprofit maybe can't afford to pay the whole overhead cost for it, but they want the project to happen. So
Yeah. Well, Kat, you've covered a lot of territory with your question. So first of all, you got to be able to, if the money is really essential to you, or to the person that you're coaching, they have to say no. That's one of the answers in your inventory is no. I can't do that. I'm trying to make money. Or the artist might say, I need to live on this. I can't do a $10,000 project for $1,000. If they have the financial flexibility, then it becomes a personal choice whether they think it's going to benefit them to take the hit on that. And then you also walked into the subject of copyright. You own the image for that. Unless you signed a piece of paper that surrendered the copyright, that's yours. That image is your intellectual property. And I have had a case where I had a client buy the copyright from me and I made them pay through the nose for it. And because it was Eli Lilly and I could, because they have more money than God. And so I took advantage of the situation. But in the case you're talking about, can you leverage that into royalties? Well, if they make money off your image, you're entitled to some or all of that money. What I'm thinking is I don't have the experience that you're asking about. Now that I've kind of rambled into it.
I have that experience if I can help.
Please do.
briefly. I had two situations where that happened. One, you mentioned, John, she owns the image, that royalty image. I did some illustrations of Diana Ross years ago, and got a chance to meet Diana Ross. She signed the illustrations and she was doing a concert. And so I asked her if I would have permission to sell the illustrations as part of the concert. And she told me that I didn't need her permission because the image was my interpretation of her, not her or anything that she owned. And so that's where I began to learn about copyright. So in that case, where you have an illustration, if it's an event, drawing people there, smaller images that you can sell as part of the event could help you turn a profit. It was in the 80s and I made like $800 for the weekend. For me, that was, enough. However, in a different circumstance, I got asked to do a proposal where they could only afford to pay me half of what it was worth to do the proposal. So what I did was I negotiated to get the other half of the payment if the funds were raised as part of the proposal, and had them sign an agreement as part of that proposal signature. And that's how I got paid the second half. And we actually raised more money than they raised more money than they anticipated. So yeah, it can be done if you think about, you have to be creative about it, but it can be done.
Well, thanks for adding that to the conversation, because it was outside my experience.
There's a graphic designer, I wish I could think of his name. He's wonderful. He has an amazing YouTube channel. And he's talked about this before, where if a client can't afford the budget to create a logo that his company's making, he said something along the lines of, well, we'll maintain ownership of this, and any profits that are made as a result of this project, we're going to always keep a percentage of that. And he said whenever he would present that idea to the clients, again, this is a graphic designer working for like corporations. He said when he would present that idea, all of a sudden the clients would figure out how to come up with the budget, because they knew that they'd always be paying him dividends of a good percentage. And so I thought that's brilliant, because a lot of times, like, I understand that resources are finite. I understand that, the arts are not in like the top necessary, like making sure society keeps running to a degree, but at the same time they are, because they spread information and they spread awareness, they celebrate culture, they celebrate history. They remind us, the arts remind us why we're doing all these other things we're doing, And so it's neat to try to find creative ways to make it so that the ones that are creating, adding to that, especially that societal use in any way, are able to maintain a sustainable operation. And I teach at BCC, so I'm always trying to tell students, like, I don't want to just tell them how to become like an artist on the craftsmanship side or design side, also on the financial sustainable side. Like, if you're going to want to do this professionally, you're just like one of the, like a craftsman, a tradesman, and the tradesmen, they have unions, they have contracts, they have things that help protect their labor and their time. And artists need to do that as well. But there's been a disconnect for a generation or two that separated, for some reason, the labor that the artists and the designers and the value they create. So I'm using the LLC model to try to work on being a part of reestablishing that reminder of, artists do this labor and they need to be compensated, and it's compensated based on, just like the plumber is compensated, just like the electrician is compensated. If somebody needs marketing done and they need an artist to come in to create imagery, sculpture, animation, anything that provides the content, especially information-based content, they need to be compensated so that they can pay their bills and continue to operate as that. Sorry, I feel like I'm the one rambling. Sorry about that, but I appreciate that information, Paula.
Yeah, I've seen both sides of that too. I think that large organizations, the larger the organization, the more, in my experience, the more likely they are to to pay for your value added, to treat you like an employee would be treated. Individual buyers don't seem to be willing to recognize how much effort we put into our art. But when I get a commission that lasts for a year, they pay me by the month. They treat me like an employee at a negotiated rate. It just seems to be like two different worlds of thought that go with that. I just put that out there as something I've observed. I commend you for what you're trying to do to get people to be look at as fair compensation for the work that we produce.
If I can add, this has been such an incredible hour of conversation, and thank you, John, so much for your contributions. This has brought up a lot of issues that I think we can explore further down the line. And Den Centauro, through Practice Best Practice, may have some resources on their, they have resources on their website. And for any artists who are working locally here in New Bedford, if that comes up when you're trying to negotiate, especially if it's with a nonprofit and you don't think that it's a fair compensation, New Bedford Creative can certainly help you in that process. It needs to be New Bedford though, because we are New Bedford Creative. So New Bedford businesses or New Bedford nonprofits. The other thing that I want to mention, New Bedford Creative is partway through a feasibility study for a business of art center. So in 2023, from January through March, we are going to be doing the second phase of that feasibility study. And we're going to be coming back to all of you, especially those of you who live local, to see where those gaps are and what kind of resources are needed to support local artists. It's not a mistake that New Bedford Creative is housed here at the New Bedford Economic Development Council. We view artists as entrepreneurs and businesses, and the entire sector contributes tremendously to the overall local economy.
I want to thank all of you for your time this afternoon. And also, I'd like to thank John once again for all of your hard work. And thanks again to our funders, MassDevelopment, TDI, and the Barr Foundation for making this possible.